Is this legit? I'm Sophie, tech marketer and social scientist. When I'm not advising tech startups on their marketing strategies, I'm helping protect everyday folks from online threats.
I'm Chris, a marketer with a background in both agencies and tech companies.
This week on Is This Legit?
As a marketer and copywriter, disruptor is so overused and overhyped. So I think this one, what are you disrupting?
Happy recording day.
Happy recording day and happy last day of
The
2024.
year.
We're recording this on 31st of December, 2024. So just counting down till 2025. And yeah, welcome back to Is This Legit? I'm Chris.
I'm Sophie. Today we're diving into something that we're very much part of this cult of startups. Yes. We've both worked in startups for many years, still do.
This episode is special because it's not just me and Soph yapping about it. We attended Slush, which is the biggest startup event in Europe. And we talked to founders, people who work, live, breathe startups, also some investors. So we got some really interesting, juicy opinions and thoughts from people who know the scene well.
When you're building a startup, it's like a roller coaster. So every day, and it's amazing and terrifying at the same time. So
Startups, it's a grind. Like startups, SaaS, whatever you're building, it's a grind, and you have to be optimistically realistic with the things you want to achieve in the long run.
be prepared for a tough journey, of course. And you really need to love the problem that you're trying to solve, because that is what will take you through the darkest times.
There are people outside of the startup sphere that's like, oh, I have a startup. I'm like, no, you have a small business. Yeah. But the term startup isn't just for I'm starting a business. The definition of a startup is, will it be scalable fast?
So your little consultancy, I'm sorry to say, is not a startup.
Doesn't count. No. And your mom and pop shop is not a startup. It's a small business, and that's perfectly fine. That's also a business model that's fine.
But apparently people who do this are so-called lifestyle startup founders. And I guess that's the cult thing in a way, that you are kind of lifestyle founder who never gets to anywhere. Usually they do have a startup, but it's just another community startup for another niche that no one needs, or it's more like a hobby.
Yeah, we're expecting hockey stick growth.
Yes.
At a point.
Yeah. Especially if you're looking at VC investment, because VCs are looking for a certain, and we're going to talk more about VCs and investment next week, but ultimately VCs want to have some kind of return on their investment, not 20 years, because they're making big bets on a ton of different companies. They're not going to have these huge successes every time. So their one success needs to actually be able to return quite well to compensate for the others that are going to fail. So anyway, not all small businesses are startups, but all startups start as a small business.
Yes. So today we're asking, are startups legit? Actually legit? And I think that question, speaking of VCs, obviously there's a lot of money going into startups. So it is a question that we should be asking. So I did a little bit of digging, and there's no data yet for 2024 because we're just wrapping up 2024, but probably in the next few weeks we'll see something. Crunchbase data shows that in 2023 alone, global startup investments reached 285 billion. That's a lot of money.
Mhm.
And that is one of the lowest years that we've had in, 5 or 6 years. So that's a 38% decline year over year from 2022. And it's still a ton of money that VCs are betting for these companies being the next big thing.
0.00 something fraction of world economy. It's not even very relevant or meaningful in a way. It's just something that drops from pension funds pockets when they walk to bank. That's VC.
The thing is that that's still a very low percentage of the actual investments going on in the world. We spoke to some actual VCs during Slush, and it is so tiny when it comes to actual money being invested and in businesses growing and whatnot. But startups and, whatever other kind of, adjacent people to startups are in the news constantly. Like, it is not even proportionate to the amount of money that's being like invested in these companies, right? And a lot of it is because it is so foreign to the general public, and it feels like Twilight Zone a lot of the time. Like, it is very much of like its own little world. Startups are kind of like weirdly have their own jargon and have their own cultures and norms. And it's very different than what most people are kind of used to. And so like it makes for great TV a lot of the time.
How many shows? So, okay, I feel like startups really like came into public kind of awareness sphere in, with like companies like Uber and WeWork, because they had these charismatic leaders, and now Spotify, and they all have their own shows now. And I'm like, this company has barely existed for like 15 years or something. So it's interesting. Yeah. But do you know what's the failure rate of startups?
A lot.
Because we see these fantastic success stories, right? But apparently there's a number that circulates, and even like Y Combinator uses it. So about 90% of startups actually fail. And this is a debatable number because it's like hard to kind of prove. So there's other ranges. I found a claim that after 5 years, 48% of startups have faltered. And after 10 years, 65% of businesses have failed. Also, about 60% of companies that reach pre-seed funding fail to make it to Series A. So yes, it's hard to make it as a startup, and all of these big success stories that we see, they are certainly outliers. And while everybody thinks they're going to be the next big thing, I would say even in the past few years, it's gotten harder and harder, as we also see investments are kind of shriveling up.
Now, big question. Do you think that startups are culty?
I think because they thrive on a shared sense of purpose of some kind. That's a good part, actually. But there's a very fine line between being purpose driven and creating environment where questioning the vision feels unsafe.
It's a mindset. So at the same time, it can be seen also a bit of like you're either in or you're out. I don't see it as a negative culture, but more as a supportive, thriving community.
To find security into something, like to feel attached to something, because when you're in startup, everything is unknown. You're kind of jumping off a cliff and you're trying to figure out what's next. So attaching yourself to trends and cults and everything makes you feel more comfortable and feeling you're part of something, when in reality you're reinventing yourself every day.
Well, having been in a few... Okay, I watched the WeWork series, and I worked at a startup, and to me, yes, they are culty.
Yeah. So it's funny. I made this Venn diagram like, I don't know, years ago.
And it's funny because that was me about to join Supermetrics, and I had just added you on LinkedIn, and that was one of the first posts that I remembered seeing from you, and I was like, what did I just sign up for?
Okay, charismatic leaders, for sure. People spookily agreeing too much on things. Startups have rights. So there might be like a rite of passage. There might be like a special kind of a habit or party song, or, there are many things, and it's very much like you follow the crowd, and it doesn't matter if you understand the purpose of it or not, you're following blindly. And I think it's a little bit culty, not questioning it.
Venn diagram between startups and cults. Okay. So where do they intersect? Charismatic leader. Yes. Own lingo, language, blind trust in leadership, in each other. It's like unconditional trust, right? Working for cheap or free. How many times do we hear about, we'll pay you in equity? Cool. That's monopoly money, my friends.
I can pay your rent with the equity.
Cults famously just use free labor all the time. Uniformed clothing, hoodies, please, swag.
My goodness, have you seen the VC uniform ever? We have a couple of options. We might have a collared shirt and a duffel vest, maybe Patagonia, or we might have also a collared shirt and a quarter zip. I don't know, like it's a called uniform.
How many company t-shirts do I own?
I have a whole closet full. I don't even know what to do with them. Blurred line with personal life. Please, all my friends are from previous startups. I don't even know what to say. Promise of a greater purpose. This vision that we're solving the world. Cults, startups. Come on, people. It's the same, right? Main difference, startups will give you a free iPhone. Yay. Free AirPods maybe. Cults will most likely have community lodging. Although, unfortunately, I have heard of very early stage startups where they, live together in a basement, in a garage, sleep at the office. So I'm sorry, but the Venn diagram is looking like a circle.
In this economy, if a company can pay for your housing, I might.
It's a cult.
I would consider.
Like there's so little, I guess, like a difference maybe is startups are meant to create a product and cults are, I don't know, because ultimately both are looking to make money. Like, I'm sorry to say, but most cults are trying to make money for the founder.
Look, if you have, well, it depends on the cult, right? Because there are some like religious cults that actually have their own like farming, and they do have produce that they sell. Well, Mormons, right? Like you go to a farmer's market in the U.S. and Mormons are selling you cheese and yogurt.
Mormons are technically a religion, recognized, not cult, but yes, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah. Anyway, I am currently looking to move, and I'm looking at apartments. And I'm like, look, if a company would offer me community lodging, I would be like, look, it is probably a culty startup, but
Well, so, I'd say like before, now we have a bit more of those documentaries kind of shedding light on what happens in those big places. But, big tech, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, whatever, they basically had campus, right? They have campuses still. You have the cafeteria, you eat there. When Elon took over Twitter, people were sleeping at the office. Like,
my God, ew.
So, our Venn diagram is really looking like a circle. Like it really is.
The two circles are merging more and more together.
And where do they overlap really? Like that is what people need to start looking out for, is how much of this is actually detrimental to yourself. The charismatic leader, we've thought about, these like, founder-led stories and these like origin stories and all this stuff, and the lore behind people like Steve Jobs or Elon or Adam Newman or Elizabeth Holmes. It's very, very easy to see why people join startups and work for free, work for cheap, let go of all of their previous life to dedicate their time for this mission. And ultimately, it's still just a company that is making profit off of your labor. And so being paid in monopoly money, or as we say, options and shares and whatnot, like anyway. Other ways that you can identify whether it's maybe potentially not scammy, but sketchy as an employee is, the whole mission discussion. If people get your mission, then they're just going to be more invested.
It's kind of like an inherent feature of them. As in, you usually have, like, especially in the early stage, you have committed people concentrating on a specific thing, like, and they're very much working towards a common goal. So they're very aligned. Well, they have to be. The successful startups kind of have to be culty because they have to have like this one mind type of thing, which is by definition culty.
So people don't join startups for the money, because a lot of the time they could get double the salary in a bigger corporation. They join because they believe in your mission, right? But the problem is when it comes down to believing the hype and the story, then you kind of get into the destructive side, right? We have a higher purpose.
We're revolutionizing.
Yeah.
Something.
And so that can be really, really detrimental. We've talked a lot also about how, hustle culture is quite sketch. The stories we hear about people sleeping under their desks, and this is not in Asian countries where we're like, oh yeah, this is the norm. No, this is in the US or even in Europe.
All the places in the world in Helsinki.
Yeah.
Where like, this is not a part of the culture.
No, but it still is in startup circles.
You don't have to do that. And like, you don't have to, what signal don't wear it as a badge of honor. And like, what signal are you sending
that's
to
the
their
problem.
employees? Because your employees are ultimately your employees.
Yeah, it's
They
never
have
going to be their baby like it's your baby. Exactly. And so that's a very, very like, dark side, definitely, of the like, work is family and, we socialize. And well, we've both worked at Supermetrics. Let's be fair. The office is definitely worthy of sticking around very much, right?
Yeah, it's nice people, nice crowd.
Nice people, fun parties, like all of that. Then the problem comes, you can't leave because when you leave, you might lose your whole
social
support
Yeah.
network. So when we talk about cults is what is the exit cost? Like if you leave, do you lose like your whole support system? Do you lose your community? That's a problem. Like if I would cut ties to all my startup relationships, I don't know how many friends I'd have left in Helsinki. I've left companies. So in that sense that I didn't really lose out there. But if I would try to leave the startup scene, I don't have that many friends left really. Right. And so that is definitely like a red flag. Luckily, I can still have my own life and like nobody's going to shun me. So in that sense, it's not like, okay, I don't want to work in startups anymore. Nobody's going to talk to me. That is the line that you want to see between cults and non-cults, for example. That you don't necessarily have the strong exit cost of really losing everybody and people just not talking to you anymore. So if you're leaving a company and people stop talking to you because you left, then that's a problem.
Them.
Yeah. I have friends at all previous companies that I've worked at, all startups. So in that sense, like
Not culty.
that's not,
much.
that's not necessarily a culty part, right? But the other things that kind of really coincide with the sketchy side. You have these weird rituals sometimes. You have hazing, but you also have, shout out Pookie Party. If you know, you know. And so other kinds of weird rituals and whatnot, that definitely can
It
be.
requires you to be in the inside circle to really get it.
Yes. But that also makes it very attractive to a lot of people because then they feel like they're part of the inner circle. Golden hoodie, club. Okay, we love y'all, but just saying.
We love you.
Yes.
Culty.
And so yeah. But some of the more, I guess, destructive sides is the us versus them, right? And this is very close to religion also in general. Like we know, we will, fix this and, you just don't get it. And like we will solve that
rolling
can
my eyes
become,
here.
yes, that can be very, very destructive for the greater society as well. Because then you have people that really creates camps and that like seeps into the general culture, right? And we see that with big tech a lot. And then you have shit like social media platforms that are interfering with elections and stuff. We will fix things and we are more suited to fix these, societal problems than everybody else. No, that is like an actual threat to society. Anywho, on the employee side, are, kinds of culty, sketchy aspects, incentives and remuneration, being paid in stock options, being paid in equity, and the whole vesting periods and loyalty. Unfortunately, we can talk about that more in the next episode, but mostly if you get paid in options, what does that mean? It means that you're being paid in the future promise that if you stick around long enough, then you can have actual shares. That means that you're a part owner in a company. In Finland, you need to pay taxes when you exercise those shares.
Probably
So a lot.
everywhere.
No,
Oh.
no, not in the US. And so you only pay your taxes in the US once you actually sell your shares. In Finland, you pay your taxes once you exercise your options. So when your options become shares. So once you become owner, then you pay taxes on the value, but you don't actually have the money from the shares yet. I had to lose several months' salary when I actually exercised some previous options. Some people can't. And when you leave, they expire. And so if they expire within
the failure rate again of startups?
very high.
Yes.
And so you might. So basically what happens is you get paid less with the promise of we will make money. You're trusting these founders to actually do their job properly. that in hopefully 10 years they IPO.
Quite a gamble. Might as well just
It's a huge gamble, right? And even if they do go to that point, eventually, if you want to leave and you only have 2 years to exercise your options, you might not be able to afford it. And so if you can't afford it, you've been working for half salary for 5 years to then not be able to actually get that equity. Yeah. So it's a huge gamble for employees as well. But on the less scary side, the kind of like visual things that people can see that kind of identify people as startups, where there's swag and there's, all other kinds of amenities at the office. Hello, yes.
iPhone with my Zooms covered.
Oh, laptop stickers and T-shirts and,
Getting paid at swag. I don't have to shop for clothes because all my socks are Supermetric socks.
I'm not even an employee and I have swag from other companies, Yeah, like it's just how that goes.
You're
And so
advertising.
basically it's advertisement. So there's a lot that kind of coincides. Some things are more dangerous than others. Swag isn't great for the environment, but other than that, not a huge deal. Being paid in stock options, that's more detrimental to people's actual livelihood. So again, there are some things that are bigger risk to the greater society, bigger risk to people's financial stability. And there are other things that are like not so bad.
Yeah, I guess you also have to have even be in a position to be able to accept a job that doesn't pay you full salary, right? Like if you have you might be super talented, but if you have kids and a house or whatever, you just can't take a job like that.
The safety that comes from actually knowing that you'll still have a job, or being able to afford to work at half salary, or these things, it's just not accessible to everyone. And so it already creates a other class of people that can afford to work at startups, and then those kinds of people are the ones that are creating the new tech. So you have that lack of diversity there as well.
Little classes.
It is. And so not all startups are like this, but it can very easily turn into it.
Yeah, it does make it.
Yeah. A few lovely examples in the past few years for the people that haven't been, watching all the documentaries we have. We have images of Adam Newman from WeWork walking around barefoot. Mandatory camp retreats, offsites. Although I've been to plenty of offsites and they're fun, but the fact
mandatory, that's where I'm like, what if I just
if you don't go, then you're still expected to kind of work during that time because people see it as work time. So it's not like you're going to a retreat for fun. You're going to a retreat to work. And if you don't work and party, you can also not party, but if you don't go, then you're still expected to work during that time. So, yes.
No,
yes.
Fair.
Just, anywho, personal experience. And, other lovely examples that we've seen. Yes, there's the whole, uniform thing that we've seen with Elizabeth Holmes or even Steve Jobs or even Mark Zuckerberg with his purple hoodie for how many years. And so that kind of uniform is just, it's a thing, right? The excuse is I wear the same thing every day so I can focus on other things, but then it becomes very significant for them.
It is a part of marketing or this personality cult where anyone that wears a black turtleneck, when I would wear a turtleneck, I get comments from people oh, you have this Steve Jobs vibe, and I'm like, it's just a turtleneck. So
yes.
What?
And the problem is I get it. I wear a lot of the same clothes. A lot of swag, but anyway, a lot of the same clothes all the time because I don't want to bother.
Or I don't 3 pieces that I like. So
right, but then it becomes a thing, right? And then people that want to emulate that start doing the thing because they think it's part of the success or whatever it is. Other weird examples, and we don't need to go into the cult of Elon, but, Elon famously works 1 billion hours himself and expects the same of his employees.
I feel like he's only sitting on the Twitter and tweeting dumb shit on ketamine.
I'm not saying that he's doing useful work, but he's working. And so the always be hustling culture, you can see that all over the place. But, you have things like companies saying, okay, unlimited PTO, but then they get fired if they actually take vacation, or, shaming people for actually taking advantage of the, compensation or other kinds of perks.
We promised you
Perk
this
that they
perk.
might have.
How dare you use this perk now?
Yeah. And so, other weird examples. And, if you want to actually dive into any of these, definitely listen to Sounds Like a Cult. Peloton being quite culty in many ways, having the instructors as almost like, religious figures and forcing employees to post on social and calling everybody a community. You have that with even like Lululemon. They had mandatory yoga.
I mean,
It's a yoga shop.
like, look, I
But-
love yoga. I teach yoga, but like mandatory, that kind of, I don't know.
They sell yoga clothes. It's not like it's a yoga studio. They sell yoga, but they had yoga for they had yoga classes for people, right? But then they forced the employees to do yoga, I don't know how many times a week. It was nuts, right? But anyway, most of these, and these are the kinds of behaviors and examples that end up in documentaries. But a lot of other startups that are not in the news and they're not ultimately dangerous still look at these as success stories. And so you will see some of this behavior like retreats or offsites or conventions or other things, or uniforms in terms of swag and jargon and us versus them. And you see that emulated into quite legit startups because they see that as those are the success stories. So even if you're a founder listening to this, really keep yourself in check as to looking to some of these as references of success. Okay, some have been debunked as actually culty and actually quite illegal, but even the ones that are not necessarily, in the news or have been prosecuted or just be careful as to what that line is between normal selling of your mission and idea to other people to get them on board and actual culty behavior. So let's turn a little bit more to the actual dark side of startups and scammy startups.
Story time.
Love stories.
So Soph already mentioned some of them, but I will cover them a little bit more in depth just to kind of give an idea how something that maybe started out as a great idea turned really dark really fast. So Soph already covered Theranos and their charismatic leader, Elizabeth Holmes. So that started all in 2003 when a 19-year-old Stanford dropout promises to revolutionize blood testing, keyword revolutionize something. So the idea was that with just one tiny drop of blood, such as from a finger prick, you could do hundreds of tests. And that sounds too good to be true because it was. So let's talk about Elizabeth Holmes. So one super random fact that I found out about Elizabeth is that her dad, Christian Rasmus Holmes IV, very royal name. Apparently they have some Danish blood in there. So he was a vice president at Enron. Dum, 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 dramatic music. You've probably, if you love scams and culty shit, then you've heard of Enron. It's an energy company that later went bankrupt after an accounting fraud scandal. It was massive. What was it, late 80s? They've recently made a little comeback. I don't know if it's a part of a joke or something else, but yeah, it's starting again. So yeah, anyway, scams run in the family. But I would say that when I read about Elizabeth, I don't know if this was all fabricated or there was some hint of reality in there, but she was actually pretty impressive. So apparently during high school, she was interested in computer programming and says that she started her first business selling, allegedly, C++ compilers to Chinese universities, and her parents even arranged a Mandarin Chinese home tutoring. And partway through high school, she started attending Stanford University's summer Mandarin program. In 2002, Holmes attended Stanford, where she studied chemical engineering, and she worked as a student research and laboratory assistant in the School of Engineering. So very promising young woman. In March 2004, she dropped out of Stanford's School of Engineering and used her tuition money as seed funding for a consumer healthcare tech company. So, interestingly, multiple expert medical professors told Holmes that what she was planning to do is impossible, that little finger prick blood testing technology. And yet, she got her advisor and dean from Stanford to back her up. And he also became the first board member of Theranos, and he was the one who introduced Holmes to VCs. So what we talked about earlier, it's all about connections, all about who you know. If it wouldn't have been for that dean from Stanford and everyone at Stanford, like people go to Stanford because of the connections, right? So makes you again wonder. Also makes me wonder if how much was that dean involved? Like if everybody else was like warning Elizabeth, and then the dean was actually, no, I love this idea. I'm gonna be on the board of this company and I'm gonna introduce you to VCs. I don't know. So, anyways,
A lot of it is the cult of personality, right? So when we say that VCs invest in teams and founders, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And that's also kind of like the backstory of Elizabeth, right? Like she's had this like very impressive background. She was in Stanford and she has the backing of a Stanford dean. That kind of like increases the trust in, investing in a team. So yes, as I said, in March 2004, she dropped out. By December 2000, she had raised $6 million. Like that's crazy. And somewhere along that time, Holmes also carefully crafted her style to resemble Steve Jobs with her black turtlenecks, and she started talking in a really deep voice. I actually have a soundbite. Let's see. It's on YouTube. Okay. So this is Elizabeth Holmes's voice.
Sure. Yeah. Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I started this company because...
What is the deal with that voice? I'm sorry.
It's extremely low. And do you have a clip of her normal voice?
I do, yes. But yeah, it's... Okay, here's her real voice.
It turned out he had a nub on his elbow, and we talked to our lab team, and they said, okay, you can do the draw. And so they did this, what would have been a finger stick on this little nub on his arm. And
her voice is naturally low, but it's quite normal sounding.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's some pressure that she has to apply in order to go from, a normal voice to talking like this. Like, how do you even hold an entire interview with this voice?
But it's interesting because, famously, Margaret Thatcher also felt like she had to bring her voice down because we're in a man's world, unfortunately. And any inkling of a more feminine voice for women brings the idea of, are you trustworthy or whatnot? So I'm not surprised that she would feel compelled to bring her register down, but
it is a little
quite jarring.
Over the top. Let's say,
Yeah.
like, I absolutely get it. Like, she is a blonde woman, conventionally attractive. And I think it is probably like hard to establish herself. Like, notoriously, also VCs invest less in female founded companies. So I think that was a little bit something that, trying to be taken more seriously and not like sexualized. But again, it's, yeah. I don't know. I hope that somebody would have just told her that, like, hey, Elizabeth, can you tone it down a little bit? Like, that voice is, like, just weird. So, yeah, somehow she managed to convince some of the most powerful people in the world to invest in Theranos with that, like, weird voice. So by end of 2010, they had more than 92 million in VC money. And we're talking about Henry Kissinger, Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family, all of them investing in Theranos. And the company was valued at $9 billion at its peak. So in 2015, Forbes had named Holmes the youngest and wealthiest self-made billionaire in the United States on the basis of that valuation, which they eventually had to take back because it was dumb. Nothing actually worked. So the house of cards came tumbling down thanks to a Wall Street Journal reporter, John Carreyrou. And in January 2022, Holmes was found guilty of defrauding investors. So that was that. We have a fake product, fake it till you make it attitude. We have a fake persona that was built up and a lot of these connections. So all of the elements that Soph kind of touched upon earlier. I'm going to cover really quickly also another really big one. Yes.
So one thing about the Theranos type, and we spoke to a lot of people also at Slush asking because a lot of the time you might be testing a product offering before you even have something concrete to show people to see if there's even a market need for it. And that's perfectly fine. We're not talking about that in terms of fake product. When we're thinking of fake product is when we pass that initial phase of trying to see if there's a market for the idea that we have. That's fine up until the point where we're promising something and then it just never comes to fruition. It's murky, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
kind of like a gray zone.
And she actually faked the head.
Well, that is the issue. So it's one thing to be like, hey, this is a prototype and, you might actually sell it already. We have Kickstarters all the time that the product isn't done yet, but this is the idea to see if it works and get funding before you can actually create it. But then if you don't ever, produce something that's usable for the people that you've sold it to, then that's when you go into the illegal category, right? But that can take quite a while. It can take many years before, especially when you're in new technology, many years to realize, well, this is actually going nowhere. So it can be quite hard to spot early.
For them to actually be like, hey, this thing isn't really working.
Any other stories?
Yes, I have FTX. If you've been listening to the news, then you are probably very familiar with the name of Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF, the crypto wonder guy who went from being worth $26 billion to facing life in prison. So he essentially ran a crypto empire from a penthouse in the Bahamas while playing League of Legends. And this FTX then was supposed to be the safe crypto exchange. So SBF was on magazine covers, doing Super Bowl ads with celebrities like Tom Brady and Larry David, and testifying before Congress. And then it turned out that he was using customer funds, like his personal piggy bank, through his trading firm, Alameda Research. So it was a very spectacular collapse last year, I believe. Yeah, early last year when they started talking about this entire fraud. So FTX went from valued at $32 billion to bankruptcy in literally days. And billions in customer money, they were just gone. They cannot be recovered. So that was massive.
This is one of those examples of it's very hard when the product that you're developing is not as concrete. And it's hard because sometimes, you're building something that's very new and that might not have an equivalent. And it's kind of hard to see, are we early innovators and finding things that don't exist yet? Or is this complete hogwash, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it is that crypto is just new tech. So it's people don't really understand what it is, but they have this young dude. And he was also, what I remember about him is that he was very adamantly building up this persona again of this hard worker. There were stories of how he would, before the investors would come in, he would pretend he had been sleeping in the meeting room just to appear like he was working really hard. So again, a very orchestrated persona product that wasn't really there. Yeah.
Okay. Last
We have, yes, the story of WeWork. And I really love this because this guy, Adam Neumann, he convinced investors that his real estate subletting company was actually a tech company worth $47 billion. So I think a lot of people think about WeWork as a tech company, as a startup. And if you look at the company numbers, they tell a completely different story. No matter how you look at WeWork's revenue and expenses, its assets, or just its cash flow, it looks far more like a real estate company than a tech firm. But how investors classify companies also affects their valuation. So of course, Adam Neumann tried to pitch it as a tech company whenever he had the opportunity. So here's a line from their initial public offering paperwork. We offer a space as a service model that we operationalize by using a global playbook powered by technology. Like, what a load of hogwash. So yeah, reality was that nearly all of WeWork's revenue came from renting office space. For example, in 2018, the We Company posted 1.8 billion in sales, and out of that, 1.7 billion, or 93%, came from memberships and services. And memberships are basically leases, and they represent the fees WeWork's customers would pay to rent space from the company. And somehow, again, Adam Neumann, he had such power that he convinced SoftBank's Masayoshi Son to invest billions in his company based on a vibe that he got after a 12-minute meeting with Adam Neumann. So in November 2023, WeWork's stock trading was suspended and halted, and WeWork filed a petition under Chapter 11 of the United States Bankruptcy Code in the United States District Court. And shortly after that, the listing liabilities of approximately 10 billion to 50 billion. So yes, I think WeWork still kind of operates, but they have the right to fold whenever they can't pay for the space anymore, so they're pretty much closing pretty fast. So yeah, pretty big spectacular failures that made the headlines, and there are so many stories that never make it to the news that are also losing a ton of money.
It's interesting because with WeWork, it's definitely kind of one of those edge case stories of it not really being tech and it being very culty in many ways, because it's a physical space. So yeah, that devolved very quickly into the culty, scammy realm. So some of the things that we've been thinking about and talking about in terms of startups and what makes them sketchy or scammy or whatnot is the lingo and the jargon that we use. So, okay, let's do a little speed round. We asked our interviewees at Slush what was their favorite jargon buzzwords, and what buzzwords should we retire and never say ever again.
I would like to cut off all those words that I always have to Google because I never remember what they mean.
Okay, so let's do a little speed round. I have a few categories of language that is very specific to startups. And so I'll go through them and then you tell me if you think we should retire or not. Okay?
Right. Exciting.
Okay, so the common phrases that we hear a lot.
Let's go for the MVP as early as we can. Let's validate. Let's have the feedback loop as close and fast as possible. Disruptor. I mean, as a marketer and copywriter, disruptor is so overused and overhyped. So I think this one, what are you disrupting?
So disruptive innovation.
What is it even?
Retire. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Speed round.
All right. Yes.
Move fast and break things. That's famous Facebook quote.
Oh my God, retired. It's
retire. Yeah.
By now.
First principles thinking.
What the fuck?
I don't know.
I don't know what that means.
Retire.
I'm all about sustainable growth. I would retire the hyper growth.
X.
Retire.
Blitz scaling. I used that earlier.
Oh my God. Retire.
I absolutely hate growth marketing because, come on, it's just marketing. Just talk about marketing.
Growth hacking.
Could keep it sort of sometimes.
So here's the thing. I actually like growth hacking. I don't like what it's become. But in terms of finding creative ways to solve problems, I think the initial method is fantastic, right? It's a lot about analyzing stuff and trying things and whatever, and that's great. I think the problem with growth hacking, it's not the term, but so much that people are using it as finding dark patterns and dark ways to get people. That's the problem.
The issue is that I have with it is that any person who has let's say in marketing, there's the growth hacking as well. And there's people who have never in their lives done any marketing and they're buying fake followers and they're growth hacking. And I'm no,
that's not growth hacking.
This is just
that's a scam. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the issue is people thinking that growth hacking is a quick fix.
Yeah. It's people who don't know the fundamentals of marketing or any fundamentals.
The next one, lean startup, lean.
I like agile because you can apply it to so many things. Velocity,
I think as a startup, that's the only advantage you have. So you should use those words all the time and you should apply it in what you do.
Again, I'm kind of like fine with it because like lean, I think is we could keep that one, but it's again people kind of using it in ways that it probably shouldn't be used. But like, yeah, you can have a lean team. You know, you have smart people that know what they're doing. You don't have to like have this like bloat of people who are like running around like headless chicken.
Product market fits. PMF, product market fit, because that's really for me essential for every earlier stage startup.
Product market fit, which I think is overused to some extent. Like, what does it mean really? I think things are moving so fast all the time anyway, so maybe you really never really have it. And if you have it, maybe you're too stable and you should try to find a better market fit. So that's one for sure.
Product market fit.
Keep it. I think it's a valuable question for every founder to have when they're evaluating their idea.
Yes. Runway or birding your runway.
Keep it. Again, a very valuable kind of question to ask yourself.
A popular one we heard, unicorn. Very divisive.
Unicorn?
I love unicorn, but I think it's overused as well, way too much.
I love unicorns since I was a child.
You know, I haven't heard that one in a long while. Yeah. I think it kind of like outlived. It's like a term from some other era. So I'm like, we can keep it, but just nobody uses it anymore.
Well, the thing is that because unicorns are startups that have a 1 billion valuation up, right?
Probably nobody uses it anymore because there's just not very many companies that go there.
The thing is that people were using it as like, okay, we want to be the next unicorn, and then realizing that scaling sustainably doesn't jive with the whole unicorn trajectory, right? And so now we're all about sustainable growth because we don't want to have to lay off half of our staff in a year. And so unicorns are rare. That's the whole point, right? The term in and of itself, I think, has given too much like lore into, okay, anybody can be a unicorn. No, that's exactly the point. That's not necessarily what you want to strive for. And lastly, in those common phrases, I don't know if they're that common, but decacorn. Have you heard
I have never heard that.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's just 10 times unicorn, right? 10 times 1 billion. So it's 10 billion valuation.
I'm trying to okay, whenever somebody says a unicorn, I'm thinking about a horse with like one
Yes.
horn. But then decacorn, I'm trying to visualize a horse with like 10 horns. And I'm like,
But you say that you haven't heard it recently, but City Center, downtown Helsinki has, how's your unicorn here, as in like rent our offices for your startup.
yes.
Yes.
Ad, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's what it is. At Slush, we went to HubSpot party. Who was dancing on the dance floor? Unicorns. It's still there. It's part of the culture.
Probably there, but yeah, I've heard less and less of that. And like, if I wouldn't have gone to this like specific unicorn party that HubSpot was hosting at Slush, then I don't know. I didn't see that much talk about unicorns directly at Slush itself.
Yeah. I think we should retire unicorn when it comes to the goal of every startup, but we can definitely keep it as a lovely mascot.
Words like disruption, unicorn. What are we actually saying when we use these terms? Are we communicating value, or are we just trying to sound impressive or some kind? So here's the thing, the language shapes the reality. And when we use jargon, we create a distance in a way.
Like a lot of the terms that you mentioned earlier, like disruptive innovation and like first principles thinking, it's just like a lot of like fluffy words that sound really smart. When you're just sitting there, like, what does it mean? Like, it's just fluff, and nobody dares to be like raise their hand and be like, what do you actually mean by saying that?
So let's continue our terms, retire or keep. Trendy prefixes and suffixes. So tagging on words at the beginning or at the end of whatever. So tech, fintech, medtech, clean tech, ad tech. Everything is tech now, apparently. I don't know.
I think that's what it is that everything anyways in 2024, like not everything, but like the majority of the cases is like tech anyway. Like if you work in digital marketing, to say that this is ad
it's just
tech,
marketing.
Like, exactly.
No, but I remember when I started Supermetrics, I had somebody tell me, we don't talk about digital marketing, we just do marketing. So do we keep the tech
Retire it.
Yeah.
2024, you don't have to say it. Like, it's just everything is tech these days.
Okay. Web3.
I still don't have a freaking clue what it retire. It's some like freaking metaverse, like avatars, like so we can have our virtual.
It's so 2023. Like, AI enabled, AI as a prefix.
AI, I'm fed up of AI. Like for me, I've been in the business for 30 years and AI was there 30 years ago. And, natural language and all of that was already there. I think it's now we've reached a new level for sure. And it's changing a lot of things, but AI is not a thing. Like it's a tool.
I think retire it because I have a love-hate relationship with AI. Like I do use it like almost on the daily, but like it's not as like shiny and new and exciting anymore. It's just kind of like it's there. It's like an
Also, I've been seeing a lot of people, luckily, talking about, is it AI or is it just automation? Like people tag AI on everything. Okay, as a service, but not like. So SaaS, software as a service is, I guess where it comes from originally, but everything now as a service.
Yeah, like that thing that Adam Newman said, like space or office space. No, we offer space as a service. Like, God damn it. Like, which is space as a service is me renting an apartment. Like that is like, stop.
I think that whole as a service is the whole subscription model. And more I'm seeing companies that are like, well, Basecamp being one of them, like you buy the thing and then you own it and then we'll update and then that's it. There's no like recurring, some of their products do have recurring, but some don't, right? And so that whole as a service is the, that whole subscription based stuff. Yeah, let's retire. I mean, unless it's like the actual subscription, like software model, then fine.
Like
but
everything else is like just fluff.
Smart as a prefix, like smartphone, smart house.
Again, I'm like, in
Smart.
2024, it's not really that impressive. Like a lot of the things are already connected to the cloud or they have some element of AI or connected. Like my washing machine has AI in it. Like
Does it like...
I don't know. It has some like button where I can turn the little like wheel and it's like AI smart like washing. I've never used it because I'm like, what is that? I don't understand what it is.
My dad keeps on saying, he's like, I don't have a smartphone. And I'm like, yeah, you do. He's like, well, it's not very smart. And I'm like, true. You know what? Yeah.
It's not smart on its own. It needs me, the human, to act in a smart way on it to make it smart.
Next one, crypto. As a prefix, like crypto something.
Crypto.
I think it's in the same space as Web3. I'm done with that.
Yeah,
I'm done. I don't need it.
I don't trust it. I think it like after the FTX collapse, like people are a little more cautious about like any crypto related stuff.
Okay, last one in the suffix prefix category. Shopify.
Hate it.
Whatever a fi. Yeah.
It's just so cliche.
But having these kinds of words that don't necessarily mean something too specific, but then making them distinguishable enough so that it's recognizable as a brand. It's hard, right? So then there's all these kinds of like respelling of things so that, we're easily recognizable when you search them on Google. Yeah. But I'm not a fan of necessarily all of them. Okay, some overused terms, and I think a lot of these we've also heard at Slush, so you might recognize some. Revolutionary.
All right, I'm gonna puke on that one, retire, because
amazing.
I think at this time and age, there's few things that like blow my mind.
Game changing.
Yeah, no.
Moon.
I haven't heard that one, but it's like, again, it's...
Shooting for the moon is basically it. Paradigm shift.
No, get it out of here.
Synergy.
Oh my God.
Leverage. How often do we hear this?
I'm cringing at every word that you're saying.
Ecosystem. Okay, internal lingo, and we've heard all of these.
I actually hate top line and bottom line because what does that mean? It's not intuitive.
Okay, literally daily. All hands.
I hate it because I had that before at an agency that we were working at, and I was like, I didn't know what, like, I know now that it means like some kind of a big meeting, but I'm like, all hands, like, is it like where you all put like hands together and then you're like,
Yeah. It's kind of like town hall. It's like, yeah, but town hall doesn't really count if every time somebody asks a question, you like divert the answer, you know? That's not the point of those. Okay. OKRs.
It's good. Let's keep that one because again, whatever you're doing, you should kind of have some kind of like key objectives that you're working towards. So I think let's keep it. People often use it in a way that doesn't necessarily, again.
I say learn what OKRs are and then you can use it. The amount of people are like, we do OKRs, and I'm like, no, you don't. This is the task list. Okay, sprint.
I think it's valid and legit. We can keep it. But again, I think a lot of the times people don't use it in ways that don't necessarily mean what a sprint means.
I've been on a team where let's do a quick 2-day sprint. And I'm like, that's not how it works.
Exactly.
That's not how it works. I'm like, a sprint is supposed to be a finite period that you can plan ahead, 2 week, 1 month, whatever it is, 3 months, so that you can plan a project within a set time frame. Let's like all hands on deck, you know? None of that. No. So retire unless you're actually using it
like
properly.
Go open a dictionary.
Okay, next one. Ship it.
I like it.
Just ship.
I actually like it. It's such a satisfying thing to say. Like when you feel like everything is ready, it's done. There's nothing else that you can do. It's just like, just ship it. Let's do it. Let's get it out there.
Yeah.
Love it.
One that we use all the time. Deep dive.
If it's really a deep dive, then yeah.
I also like side quests. It wasn't on my list, but I like side quests. Circle back.
I always think about this like never-ending loop of circle backs. I like to use it as a joke because
retire, circle back, because you never actually circle back.
It's only as like ironically where I'm like, I never intend to come back to this again. Let's circle back.
Touch base.
No, I don't know.
Low-hanging fruit.
No.
I think low-hanging fruit and like easy win and like those kinds of things. I'm like,
when it's an actual low-hanging fruit.
Sure. Any funding talk. So this goes maybe more in the VC, but anyway, pre-money, post-money. Basically pre-rev, post-rev.
I've never really heard that one.
Yeah, you hear it more in the investment circles. It's basically before you have any like paying customers and after you have money. Okay, metrics.
ARR and ROI. I do like ROI because ROI, you know, I know it's jargon, but you know what? Like when I'm thinking about it, like, is this worth my time? I'm thinking about the ROI, and here we are. I love that.
Leo founder coded. Like,
Yeah. Performance is everything.
Yeah.
Money is everything.
Good.
give me the money. So burn rate.
Keep that because again, you gotta have your financials in check.
Customer acquisition cost.
Keep it important.
Lifetime value.
Also keep it important.
Monthly recurring revenue.
Important.
Annual recurring revenue.
Also important.
Net promoter score.
I would say keep it, but because I don't really work in that area, so I'm like, whenever I see that, I'm like, I don't actually know what that means.
MQL, SQL, any kind of qualified lead.
Probably need to keep it, but again, that's like, make sure that everyone is like on board what they mean, and it's like aligned.
Can you tell we worked at Supermetrics? We're like, yes, keep all the metrics, please.
Yes.
Okay, so why do we think that startups have all these kinds of jargon and buzzwords? There are a few things. It does help having common language to kind of shortcut having to describe things. But really, there's a lot of it is people like being in the inner circle. It makes them feel special. And so the more kind of like buzzword terminology, the more people feel like, oh, they're part of this little group that knows, right? So the whole like insider language. Yes, it has the whole like tribal feel to it, you know? Unfortunately, that also means that it's very exclusive to anybody else. So people feel like, I don't know what's happening there. I would say people who can't speak outside of buzzword and jargon usually don't really understand things deeply enough to explain them in simple ways. And people who only speak in jargon are probably don't understand as much
They're just
about
bluffing.
the topic. Yeah, they might not even realize it, right? You don't know what the words are, then you start knowing what the words are, but then you don't know them deeply enough to actually be able to not use them. And then you go to the phase of, I know them enough that I can just speak in normal terms, right? I think from the person hearing those kinds of communication and language and whatnot, just be careful with getting sucked into the hype from somebody using so much jargon,
You should
and
just ask
questioning.
them, what do you mean by that? And see how they crumble. Watch the world burn. Ha!
Some interesting little science behind how we see linguistics, and these kinds of like culty phenomenons and whatnot. So the reasons why these things are so intertwined, you have this whole selling the mission dynamic and all of that, like building some kind of reality and putting things into words that is more concrete and makes people feel like they're serving a bigger purpose. So there's this whole like creation of this little world. So that's one of the reasons why we have these kinds of terms that come out. But then there's also the power dynamics that come into play. And we were talking about founders and VCs and all these, this hierarchy in language. But then there's also the, code switching that happens. So code switching is basically speaking a different way, either with different terms or different dialects or whatnot with different kinds of people, right? Yeah. And so you get that happening as well, where you're speaking to investors, you're speaking about cap tables and term sheets and whatnot. And then you're speaking to your employees and you're speaking about the mission and about growth and all these things. And then you're speaking to your customers and you're like, okay, like all of these suffixes, right? Like AI, blah, blah. And so you get that kind of thing that ends up like almost alienating people from each other, but keeping that that's kind of culty aspects there. But then there's also the cultural associations that you get with language. And so then you get the more corporate speak. And it's like, oh, you're using that, then you're part of that group. You don't fit into the startup world. And then you have these new, fancy things that don't mean anything really, but it's like, oh, this is new and innovative versus like a lot of the stuff like we can just use plain language and it makes sense for everybody. And so I find it very kind of interesting to study how startups are almost like their own culture, and understanding that actually helps people identify better what is destructive and what isn't. But
What is
be wary of, I think the hard ones are probably the language-based culty aspects are the tough ones to break out of and to see behind, because they do kind of like wire your brain in a certain way into thinking that things are different than they actually are. Like instead of using leverage, you can use literally,
I wonder, like, thinking about these like big scammy startups, right? Like Theranos or WeWork. And like, I mean, a big part of getting the investor money and getting that fame was the linguistics. Like we saw, WeWork doing it and using words in a very clever way to take away the idea that it's just a rental leasing company. And it's like, no, it's a tech company. So linguistics do play a big role. And the same way with like getting these investors for Theranos, I'm pretty sure that the Walton family had no big like idea what was happening, but it sounded legit. So
I'd say like there's many things externally that you can identify and see, like, okay, like swag is not necessarily a red flag, but maybe if you start seeing definitely a strong similarity between employees in behavior and how they portray themselves and whatnot, and you might want to question a little bit more how destructive the company can actually be. But yeah, it's really ultimately about how detrimental it can be for you and where your limit is as to, am I willing to take the risk with being paid in stock options for how long? Putting those limits to yourself before, because it's very easy to get caught up in the vision, mission, jargon, etc. afterwards. And then you've bought in, and then leaving is almost like not really a possibility. So, question. Are startups legit?
it's complicated. I mean, I think there's a lot of, as we see, there's a lot of companies, startups that make a lot of buzz and there's not much behind them. And then there are some companies and startups that are like very legit, but they're legit because they're doing the work and they're not sitting and making big PR moves, right? So it's the big flashy companies that give startups a bad name.
But the reality is that we live in a very fast-paced environment right now, high stakes ecosystem. People are afraid to miss the opportunity. So that feels that fear is creating opportunities for bad actors. The solution is very simple, but it's not easy. The solution is slow down. So do the work, ask hard questions. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is. And above all, surround yourself with people who prioritize integrity over the quick wins.
Would like to thank the amazing people who agreed to talk with us at Slush. Ivana Pesic Forbes,
Maria Luukkainen, Viivi Marttinen,
Misha Kaltyshev,
Anni Salo, Rémy Bertoli, Sophie Forest,
Divotsna Jangir, Henri Haaksiala, Zhao Hanbo,
and Kurre Ståhlberg. So next week, we'll be talking about VCs, funding, investment, etc. In the meanwhile,
this startup-y line. But yeah, that's all we've got for today. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow Is This Legit wherever you get your podcast.
And leave us a rating and a review. And send us a message, isthislegitpod.com on our website, if you have any ideas for episodes or stories that we can feature.
All right.
And thank you to everybody who answered our lovely questions when we cornered them at Slush. We really appreciate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right. See you next week when we'll be asking our VCs legit.
Dear listeners, please note that the views and opinions in this episode, like all episodes of Is This Legit, do not reflect the official position of the podcast and are the hosts and guests' subjective opinions and quoted allegations. The content from each episode of Is This Legit should not be taken for indisputable fact and should be viewed as an educational starting point for listeners. All content shared by our hosts, guests, and sponsors are their own opinions and are not meant to defame or misrepresent any business, group, organization, individual, anyone, or anything. Just don't scam people. Okay? Okay.